The shrill ring of the doorbell pierced the air, shattering the peaceful laughter that had filled the cozy living room just moments before. I shot a quizzical glance at my two giggling children, wondering who could be disturbing our evening. As I opened the door, a prim-looking woman in a pressed pantsuit stood before me, her face twisted into an unpleasant scowl. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" I asked politely, my brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm your neighbor, Karen," she announced in a clipped tone, "and I'm here to file a noise complaint against your family. The incessant laughter and racket from your home is disruptive and unacceptable." I blinked, stunned by the audacity of her accusation. "I'm sorry, but my children were simply playing and laughing." "I don't care," Karen interrupted, her voice rising shrilly. "This is an upscale neighborhood, and we expect a certain level of decorum. Your family's behavior is unbecoming and will not be tolerated." Before I could respond, she thrust a thick stack of papers into my hands. "Here are the necessary forms. I expect you to keep the noise down from now on, or I'll be forced to take legal action." With that, she turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my mouth agape. I glanced down at the papers, a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. This was not the first time Karen had made an issue out of our family's normal daily activities, but her audacity still managed to catch me off guard. Shaking my head in disbelief, I closed the door and returned to the living room, where my children sat wide-eyed, their laughter replaced by a palpable tension. "Who was that, Mommy?" my youngest asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Just our neighbor, Karen," I replied, forcing a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, everything's fine." But as I looked at the stack of papers in my hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Karen was not one to back down easily, and I knew that this was only the beginning of a long and frustrating battle. The next morning, I found myself in a tense meeting with our homeowners association, Karen's disapproving gaze burning holes in the back of my head. She had wasted no time in escalating the issue, and now I found myself forced to defend my family's right to simply exist in our own home. "Mrs. Anderson, I understand your concern about the noise level, but surely you can appreciate that children at play make some amount of noise," I argued, doing my best to remain calm and composed. Karen sniffed disdainfully. "This isn't about some amount of noise, Mrs. Wilson. It's about the constant, disruptive racket emanating from your home at all hours of the day and night. My family and I deserve to enjoy the peace and quiet of our neighborhood without having to endure your family's unruly behavior." I opened my mouth to respond, but the association president raised a hand, silencing me. "Mrs. Anderson raises a valid point. As much as we all love children, we do have certain expectations regarding noise levels and decorum in this community." My heart sank as I realized that, despite the fact that my children had been doing nothing more than playing and laughing, the association was actually siding with Karen. I glanced around the room, hoping to find a sympathetic face, but all I saw were expressions of polite disinterest or outright disapproval. "Now, Mrs. Wilson," the president continued, "we're willing to give you a warning this time, but if we receive any more complaints about excessive noise from your home, we'll have no choice but to levy a fine." I nodded mutely, feeling the weight of the association's judgment bearing down on me. As the meeting adjourned, Karen shot me a triumphant smirk, her eyes glinting with a hint of malicious glee. Dejected, I returned home, my children's laughter echoing in my ears. How could something so innocent and joyful be deemed a nuisance? I couldn't help but wonder if Karen's vendetta against our family ran deeper than just a noise complaint. The next few weeks were a never-ending battle of tiptoeing around our own home, constantly shushing my children and stifling their laughter and play. It was a constant source of frustration and guilt, knowing that my kids were being denied the simple pleasures of childhood because of our overbearing neighbors' demands. One particularly sunny afternoon, I decided to take the kids to the park, hoping to give them a much-needed outlet for their energy. As we played on the swings and chased each other around the jungle gym, I let my guard down, savoring the sound of their joyful giggles. That is, until a familiar figure approached, her lips pursed in a disapproving frown. "Mrs. Wilson," Karen said icily, "I see your family has decided to take its disruptive antics to the public sphere." I felt my shoulders tense as I turned to face her. "Karen, we're at the park." "I don't care where you are," she interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "The constant noise from your children is unacceptable, and I won't stand for it any longer." My children, sensing the tension, had gone silent, their eyes wide with fear. I pulled them close, shielding them from Karen's withering glare. "Karen, please," I pleaded. "They're just kids, and they need to play and be kids. Can't you understand that?" "I understand perfectly well," she retorted. "And I've had enough. If I hear one more peep out of your family, I'll be filing another complaint with the association. Perhaps they'll be more inclined to take action this time." With that, she turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving me feeling utterly helpless and ashamed. My children, sensing my distress, huddled close, their faces etched with worry. "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" my youngest asked, her voice trembling. I pulled her into a tight hug, blinking back tears. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. Karen is just being difficult." As we made our way home, the weight of Karen's threat hung heavy in the air. I knew that this battle was far from over, and I couldn't help but wonder how much more my family could endure before the situation truly spiraled out of control. The next few months were a constant source of stress and anxiety for our family. Karen's relentless campaign against us had escalated, and we found ourselves living in a state of perpetual fear, tiptoeing around our own home and carefully monitoring our children's every move. The final straw came when I received a summons to appear in court, the result of yet another noise complaint filed by our vindictive neighbor. As I sat in the stuffy courtroom, my heart pounding, I scanned the room for any sign of sympathy or understanding. But all I saw were stern faces and an overwhelming sense of judgment. Just as the judge was about to begin the proceedings, a familiar figure caught my eye. It was our next-door neighbor, Mr. Johnson, who also happened to be the presiding judge. I felt a glimmer of hope flare in my chest. Surely, Mr. Johnson, who had known our family for years, would understand the innocuous nature of our children's laughter and play. Perhaps he would even take Karen's relentless crusade against us into consideration. However, as the trial began, it became painfully clear that Mr. Johnson was not going to be the ally I had hoped for. He listened intently as Karen presented her case, nodding sullenly and casting disapproving glances in my direction. When it came time for me to speak, I tried my best to plead my case, explaining how my children were simply being kids, and that the noise they made was nothing out of the ordinary. But Karen was relentless, interrupting me at every turn and painting our family as disruptive, inconsiderate neighbors. As I sat there, watching helplessly as the judge weighed the evidence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. Mr. Johnson, who had always been a friendly and reasonable man, seemed to have been swayed by Karen's manipulative tactics. The judge's verdict was swift and merciless. Based on the evidence presented, I have no choice but to side with Mrs. Anderson. The Wilsons are hereby fined $500 for repeated noise violations, and I strongly advise them to keep the noise down in the future, lest they face even harsher penalties. As I left the courtroom, my children trailing behind me with downcast eyes, I felt an overwhelming sense of defeat. Karen had won this round, and I couldn't help but wonder how much more our family could endure before the situation spiraled completely out of control. The court ruling had left me feeling defeated and helpless, but I refused to let Karen's vindictive crusade tear my family apart. That night, as I tucked my children into bed, their eyes brimming with unshed tears, I made a silent vow to fight back. The next morning, I marched straight to the Homeowners Association, determined to address the issue head-on. I laid out the facts, detailing the unreasonable nature of Karen's complaints and the unfair treatment we had received from the judge, who happened to be our neighbor. To my surprise, the association members listened intently, their expressions shifting from indifference to concern as I laid out the timeline of events. Several of them even admitted that they had witnessed Karen's confrontational behavior firsthand and were beginning to question the validity of her claims. Mrs. Wilson, we had no idea the situation had escalated to this degree, the association president said, shaking his head. It's clear that Mrs. Anderson has taken her campaign against your family too far, and we simply cannot condone such behavior from one of our residents. I felt a glimmer of hope flare in my chest as the president continued. We're going to review the judge's ruling and see if there's anything we can do to overturn the fine. In the meantime, we'll be having a very stern conversation with Mrs. Anderson about her conduct. As I left the meeting, my steps felt a little lighter. Perhaps, with the backing of the Homeowners Association, I could finally put an end to Karen's relentless harassment. I couldn't wait to share the good news with my children, to see the worry and fear in their eyes replaced by the joyful laughter I had grown to cherish. But as I approached our front door, I was met with a sight that sent a chill down my spine. Karen stood on our doorstep, her arms crossed and her face set in a triumphant grin. Mrs. Wilson, she purred, I see you've been running to your little association friends, but I'm afraid that's not going to save you this time. Before I could react, she thrust a thick envelope into my hands. I've filed a restraining order against your family. You're no longer allowed to come within 500 feet of my property. My heart sank as I stared at the envelope, the weight of her words sinking in. How could this be happening? Just when I thought we had a glimmer of hope, Karen had managed to turn the tables on us once again. As the reality of the situation set in, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. What were we going to do now? The news of the restraining order hit our family like a ton of bricks. My children, who had been cautiously hopeful after my meeting with the Homeowners Association, were once again plunged into a state of fear and uncertainty. I spent the next few days in a haze of disbelief, desperately searching for a way to fight back against Karen's latest move. But every avenue I explored seemed to lead to a dead end. The restraining order was airtight, and the judge who had issued it was the same neighbor who had sided with Karen in the previous court case. As I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, my youngest daughter approached me, her brow furrowed with worry. "Mommy, are we going to have to move?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt my heart break as I looked into her innocent eyes. "No, sweetheart, we're not going to move. We're going to stay right here and fight this, I promise." But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could keep that promise. The thought of uprooting our family, of abandoning our home and our community, was a bitter pill to swallow. And yet, the alternative, living under the constant threat of Karen's harassment and the restraining order, was equally unpalatable. As I struggled to come up with a plan, my mind kept returning to the Homeowners Association. They had seemed sympathetic to our plight, and I knew that they held sway in the community. Perhaps they could intervene on our behalf, or at the very least, put pressure on Karen to back down. With renewed determination, I made my way to the association's office, ready to plead our case once again. But as I approached the building, I was met with a sight that made my heart sink. Karen was already there, her posture radiating an air of triumph. I'd braced myself for the worst as I entered the office, but to my surprise, the association members greeted me with expressions of concern and support. "Mrs. Wilson, we've been waiting for you," the president said, his brow furrowed with worry. "We've been discussing this situation, and we're not happy with the way it's been handled. We're going to do everything in our power to get that restraining order overturned." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, my shoulders sagging as the tension drained from my body. Perhaps, with the association's backing, we could finally put an end to Karen's reign of terror. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Karen's face, and the icy glint in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. I knew that she wasn't going down without a fight. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and tense negotiations as the Homeowners Association fought tirelessly to overturn the restraining order against my family. Karen, it seemed, was not about to back down without a fight, and she had enlisted the help of a team of high-powered lawyers to defend her position. The courtroom was a battlefield, with both sides presenting arguments and evidence, each trying to sway the judge to their side. I sat there, my heart pounding, as I listened to Karen's lawyers paint my family as inconsiderate, disruptive neighbors who refused to respect the rules of the community. But the association's legal team was equally determined, and they worked tirelessly to counter Karen's claims, highlighting the unreasonable nature of her complaints and the unjust treatment we had received from the judge who happened to be our neighbor. As the proceedings dragged on, I found myself torn between hope and despair. Would the judge see through Karen's manipulation and rule in our favor? Or would we be forced to abandon our home and start anew somewhere else? The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the judge finally rose to deliver his verdict. I held my breath, my fingers gripping the arms of my chair, as he cleared his throat and began to speak. After careful consideration of the evidence presented by both parties, I have made the decision to overturn the restraining order against the Wilson family. A collective gasp rippled through the room, and I felt my heart leap with joy. We had won. Karen's smug expression melted into one of pure disbelief, and I couldn't help but savor the moment of triumph. As the judge continued to lay out his reasoning, it became clear that he had seen through Karen's vindictive crusade and recognized the unjust nature of his previous ruling. He acknowledged the importance of allowing children to play and express themselves, and he condemned Karen's efforts to deprive my family of that basic right. When the proceedings finally concluded, I rushed to embrace my children, tears of relief streaming down my face. We had weathered the storm and emerged victorious, thanks to the unwavering support of the Homeowners Association and the judge's newfound impartiality. As we made our way home, I couldn't help but wonder how Karen would react to this latest defeat. But for now, all that mattered was the sound of my children's laughter, filling the air with a sweetness that no one could ever hope to suppress. In the aftermath of the court victory, our family's sense of relief was tempered by a lingering unease. While the restraining order had been overturned, we couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was far from finished in her quest to make our lives miserable. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the next incident occurred. One sunny afternoon, as my children played happily in the backyard, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into our driveway. When I peeked out the window, my heart sank. It was Karen, and she was marching towards our front door with a scowl on her face. Steeling myself for another confrontation, I opened the door, ready to confront her. But before I could speak, she thrust a thick envelope into my hands. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, my brow furrowed in confusion. "A lawsuit," Karen spat, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm suing you and your family for harassment and trespassing." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Harassment and trespassing. What on earth are you talking about? "Don't play dumb with me, Mrs. Wilson," she sneered. "Your children have been constantly disturbing the peace in our neighborhood, and now they've been caught trespassing on my property. I'm putting a stop to this once and for all." I felt a wave of anger wash over me. "Karen, this is completely absurd. Our children have never set foot on your property, and the noise they make is nothing out of the ordinary for a family with young kids. You're just grasping at straws now." But Karen was unmoved, her eyes narrow with determination. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that. And this time, I won't be leaving empty-handed." With that, she turned and stormed back to her car, leaving me standing in the doorway, my hands trembling with fury. As I gathered my children and explained the situation, I could see the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. They had been through so much already, and the thought of having to face another legal battle was simply exhausting. But as I held them close, I made a silent vow. I would not let Karen break us. We had fought too hard and come too far to let her win. This time, We would be ready, and we would fight back with everything we had. The battle lines had been drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. I knew that the coming days and weeks would be a roller coaster of emotions, but I was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. For my family, and for the simple joys of childhood that Karen had tried so hard to snuff out, I would stand my ground.